Some just count tanks. Others steal blueprints for nuclear bombs. The Cold War is the battleground for thousands of spies and spotters.
Both sides collected intelligence in order to avert what was considered to be a looming war.
The secret services have few scruples when it comes to procuring intelligence. They pay for acts of treason which may spell death for those exposed.
Do I have an awareness of blood guilt? No, I didn't.
They were spooks with a license to spy. The men of the Allied military liaison missions in Germany were at the forefront of the intelligence war between East and West. Yet even today, hardly anything is known about their feats.
No other Western intelligence service got as close to Soviet military equipment.
But where there are secrets, there's danger too.
We knew that Soviet sentries were trigger-happy. They tended to shoot first and ask questions later, if at all.
Kalashnikov stuck in my neck, okay, so you don't move, okay?
The risks were pretty enormous. In fact, how on earth I'm still alive, in fact, how on earth any of us are still alive, I have no idea.
They were friends, and I understand what it takes to lose a friend, a close friend, for this matter.
Nigel Dunkley, a veteran of the British military mission, in a hangar near Jüterbog, a small town south of Potsdam. He's meeting up with Manfred Müller of the local Garrison Society. Dunkley is telling him about his missions, about reconnaissance tours in enemy territory at night. Manfred Müller has several items in his museum that were high on the British military mission's wish list in the 1980s. The officers of the Allied military liaison missions were constantly on the road. As couriers with a diplomatic passport, their original task was to solve problems between the four occupying powers in Germany. However, they soon exploit their freedom by spying on their opponents, the Soviets in Western Germany, and the Americans, British and French in the East, the German Democratic Republic. Each side is allowed to send out 63 men. An all-terrain vehicle is approaching a Soviet bunker. It is the early 1980s. The British are on the hunt for new types of ammunition that could contain biological or chemical warfare agents. The bunker should only be manned during military exercises. The intruders can't be completely sure of that, however. They have reached the room that holds the air filters. How these filters are constructed tells experts which warfare agent they are supposed to protect against. Nigel Dunkley takes part in the hunt for these filters. In Jüterbog, he sees the once highly coveted barrels again. Dunkley never talks about the background of his missions. Most of it is still top secret. He only talks about what he experienced.
It was dark. I dropped the filter that I was removing. The guard heard that. His dog barked. And so I ran away as fast as I could. There's no other expression for it.
NATO insists on speeding up the investigation. How are the Soviet filters constructed? What warfare agents did the Soviets prepare for in an emergency? Could it be types of agents the West does not know of yet? In 1982, at a military exercise area, the British get their hands on the first filter. The news of the captured barrel hits the Ministry of Defence in London like a bombshell. The filter apparently protects against germs as well, biological particles being scattered by grenades, for example. In response, NATO is said to launch a research program to upgrade their own filters.
Of course, we knew that anything that was important that we borrowed, as we would say, would probably pretty quickly be replaced. And so a few weeks later, we went back, and there was the brand new one. That was the one that we wanted, so we stole that as well.
Afghanistan. Soviet troops have been occupying the country since December 1979. Moscow wants to break any resistance against the communist regime that has been installed in Kabul. The insurgent Mujahideen appear powerless in the face of full Soviet firepower. Attack helicopters dominate the battlefield. Yet secretly, the Americans are supporting Islamist resistance groups in Afghanistan. The war at the Hindu Kush turns into yet another theater of operations for the secret services.
Die CIA als Mittel der amerikanischen Regierung.
The CIA launched Operation Cyclone, which is one of the longest and most expensive CIA operations to date.
Und teuersten Operationen der CIA bis heute. Insgesamt
in all, the cost of this covert program, which included arms delivery as well as economic aid, amounted to several $billion.
Eine Milliardensumme.
This money mostly flows to Pakistan, the central hub for the armament of the Mujahideen. The CIA also supplies them with modern Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. The tide is starting to turn. With Stinger missiles, the Mujahideen can shoot down jets and helicopters. Soviet troops sustain severe casualties. In the mountains of Afghanistan, the superpower's heavy arms are ineffective. The alliance of Mujahideen and the CIA win the war. The US bolster a partner who will soon turn against them, while the Soviet Union loses a lot of prestige. Roughly 1 million people die, 15,000 Soviet soldiers among them. Hind attack helicopters fly over East Germany. Scouts from a Western military mission observe a maneuver. The war in Afghanistan deepens the divide between East and West. Soviet troops exercise new attack strategies.
The Hind pilots impressed me, and I was an attack pilot as well, albeit in jets rather than helos. They flew low, aggressively, and maintained positive control over the aircraft. I doubt that our helo pilots could have flown better than many of the Hind pilots that I saw.
The military mission's task is to find out whether the Soviets are deploying combat units from East Germany to Afghanistan. They need to produce information no matter how they get it. The officers with diplomatic passports put on thigh-length overboots and protective gloves. None of them know what they will have to touch that night. They check their flashlights one last time. The barracks rubbish tip is their target. But they are not alone. The smallest noise could give the scouts away and alert the guard. Examining rubbish tips at night was part of the British Operation Tomahawk, activities which had been classified top secret until just recently. A noise alerts the guard. The snoopers scan the area. Could there be a second guard? It is just a stray dog. All clear. However, scouts feared dogs on night missions, as Nigel Dunkley remembers.
There were quite often wild dogs out on the rubbish tips. These dogs scared me, and I don't mind admitting it. One of them, I remember, came up to me, like they often did, and started sniffing around my leg. And I thought, this dog must have rabies. It's not acting properly.
A single dog can put the men in danger. After half an hour, the guard finally gets in his jeep and drives off. With the way to the rubbish tip clear, the British scouts are hoping for discarded data sheets on tanks, duty rosters, notepads, and maybe evidence for missions in Afghanistan. Instead, they find rotting kitchen waste. While methodically feeling around for something useful for their analysts, they get lucky. A grubby postcard with a field post number. They know that such numbers are the key to an army's structure and to its order of battle in the event of war. Soldiers have numbers, just like the units they serve in, and the tanks they are scheduled to fight in an emergency. That's routine business to the military missions. A seemingly endless roster of digits on tens of thousands of vehicles that is often boring, but important.
883, so the first one was 882.
Heavily armed men are protecting a visitor to the cemetery. Ryszard Kuklinski, a former officer and traitor in the General Staff of the Polish Army, fears a revenge attack. He is visiting his parents' grave in 1998, 1 year after his death sentence for treason has been reversed and he has been rehabilitated.
Ryszard Kuklinski passed on documents on the Warsaw Pact to the Americans for 9 years, from 1972 to 1981. With these almost 350,000 photographed documents, he provided the Americans with in-depth knowledge on the Soviet side of the Warsaw Pact.
Kuklinski contacts the CIA in the hopes of reducing the risk of a nuclear war. A war in which Poland would become a battlefield as well. He reveals military installations and strategies of the Warsaw Pact.
The Americans were wondering whether the Soviet nuclear arsenal was intended to serve as a threat or whether they would use it in an attack on Western Europe. And Kuklinski's documents indicated that the Russians were indeed using their nuclear potential offensively as well.
Poland in the late 1970s. The labor union Solidarity is challenging the communist regime. Kuklinski cautions against a Soviet invasion into Poland, reporting plans to declare martial law to the CIA. When it is finally imposed in December 1981, the defector has already escaped to the United States. Hiding in boxes, Kuklinski, his wife, and their 2 sons are smuggled out of the country via East Berlin by the CIA. In a transporter, disguised as diplomatic baggage, they escape at the last minute.
In 1984, he was sentenced to death in absentia. The sentence was not reversed until 1997, long after the Warsaw Pact had been disbanded and Poland was no longer a communist country. Kuklinski was controversial because there was dispute over Poland's status in the Cold War. Was it a sovereign state? If so, Kuklinski would have betrayed Poland and could be considered a traitor even today. Or was it just a puppet of the Soviets, and Kuklinski had therefore only betrayed the occupying power?
Ryszard Kuklinski does not fall prey to an act of revenge. In 2004, he dies of a stroke in his exile in the US. To the present day, he is a controversial figure in Poland. The Warsaw Pact is not the only victim of a master spy, however. NATO is as well. This spy's employer is the Ministry for State Security of the GDR, the Stasi. His code name is Topaz. His real name is Rainer Rupp. As a spy, he makes no mistakes. It is not until 1993 that he is arrested and put on trial. Rupp had been releasing top-secret documents on NATO's military strategy and armament plans to East Germany since 1977.
Rainer Rupp had access to documents you can only dream of, key documents from NATO headquarters. They were so fantastic, the Ministry of State Security immediately passed them on to the KGB the minute they received them.
Rupp is a spy by political conviction. He is sentenced to 12 years on charges of high treason, which could have been disastrous in the case of a conflict, as the opinion of the court stated. NATO is working towards its nuclear rearmament in the late 1970s, yet nobody suspects Moscow to have gained this intelligence via its mole, Topaz. Nigel Dunkley, on the premises of a former military hospital in Belitz, a place that still haunts him. About 30 years ago, he was secretly rummaging through the trash from the operating theatres.
It was a sickly, sweet, disgusting, rotten smell.
The Belitz sanatoriums were built in the late 19th and early 20th century. After World War II, the Soviets move in. In the 1980s, the military mission's interest in hospitals of the Soviet military is growing. That's especially true for the British, who are hoping that in Belitz they will gain new information on the war in Afghanistan. The Soviets suffer severe casualties in the Hindu Kush. It is quite possible that some of their wounded were treated in Germany as well. The British want to get to the bottom of that assumption. That is why Dunkley is sent to Belitz on some of the most depressing field trips he has ever been on. The military missions did not have access to the sanatorium itself, only to its rubbish tip.
Coming back to this place after all these years still is a very emotional experience. When I think of what happened here, when I think of what went on, the number of people who suffered here from the Soviet army, for me still, all these years later, it is still a very, very moving experience.
The operating theatres lie in ruins, but it only takes a few of the remnants to send Dunkley back on a journey through time. A medicine cabinet in the anesthesia department provides a window into the past.
Wow, absolutely amazing to find these medicines here.
Dunkley contemplates the fate of patients and the work of the doctors.
It's extraordinary to think that while the Russians were doing their surgical preparation in here in the operating theater, we at the same time are are out there waiting for the blood-stained bits of uniform, for the bandages covered in mess and bits and pieces, body parts even, from time to time. We're waiting there, as it was described, like vultures on a branch.
For hours, they are on standby at the disposal site. They want to know where the fresh bags are being dumped. As soon as the dust cart leaves, their work starts. Dunkley discovers remains of amputated tissue in a boot. A find that upsets him.
I did this for 2.5 years. You can't do this kind of stuff without, after a while, it has an effect on you. You begin to think in your quieter moments what you have found, and then you begin to wonder about the fate of the young person whose jacket pocket you looked through.
Going through waste is hardly a new method in the business of espionage. That the missions employ it as well remains a well-kept secret for quite some time. They are rummaging for papers and letters, systematically looking for them in the pockets of discarded uniforms.
In a uniform jacket pocket, there was this letter that said, "Daragaya Mat, dear Mum, dear Mother, I think I'm the last one left. We were attacked recently. It was terrible. I think I'm the only survivor of that ambush by the Taliban." And that had a really big impact when you start to think, what happened to the soldier? Because the letter was never finished.
How many soldiers who were wounded in Afghanistan were treated in Belitz is disputed. There probably were individual cases, Soviet soldiers who had been detailed there from East Germany. Hospital waste can reveal quite a lot, even without war wounded, about medical standards or protection against infections. All of that is relevant for the combat strength of an army. In the late 1970s, the Cold War undergoes its next dangerous escalation. Each SS-20 carries 3 nuclear warheads and could reach any location in Western Europe from Russia. A nuclear conflict confined only to Europe is looming. It might be an alternative for the superpowers, but it would mean the end for Germany. In West Berlin, the ruin of a listening post, shrouded in mystery, is rotting away. Its protective sheathing in tatters, its antennae dismantled. Helmut Müller-Enbergs, an expert on secret services, is imagining the babble of voices on the airwaves that the spies on the Teufelsberg, the Devil's Hill, used to listen to.
They don't know what's happening in the east, but from this location, they can take a peek at the desks of their enemies, so to speak. Where are tanks being moved? Where are maneuvers being conducted? What is going on?
The Americans and the British use Teufelsberg as a base for spying. 1,500 personnel intercept, translate, and analyze in shifts. Their antennae pick up communications several hundred miles away.
If there hadn't been sources or agents of the Stasi here, we probably still would not know who was on duty here or how many of them there were, and we wouldn't know what was recorded.
Teufelsberg is one station in a global network operated by the National Security Agency, or NSA. an effective squad of eavesdroppers that, in the early 80s, is still top secret. However, that is about to change. With James William Hall, a US soldier working at Teufelsberg. In 1982, Hall begins passing on secret documents on the American eavesdropping operations to the KGB and the Stasi. Among them were long lists of the NSA's targets. Hall's photocopier is running hot. He and his associate are said to wear sunglasses so they can keep the copier's lid open and therefore work faster. Even a classified document with the codename Canopy Wing is sent to East Berlin that way.
Canopy Wing?
Canopy Wing has to be the best piece of intelligence the Stasi was ever able to gather. Unfortunately, we cannot read the documents today. We only have their projections, statements, and hints about them.
Projektionen, Einlassung, Andeutung.
But with all the speculation combined, we can assume that the State Security Service had the ingredients required for a preemptive nuclear strike.
Erstangriff nuklearer Dimension in Händen gehalten.
They had a strategy for electronic combat.
Kampfzuschlagen.
Hall betrays how NATO would communicate in the case of an emergency, and how they want to disrupt the Warsaw Pact's communications. The Stasi describes how the West wants to manipulate radio communications between pilots and control centers on the ground. Strategies that must have been unsettling for Moscow. In the chaos surrounding the Stasi's files after the reunification of Germany, insiders secure the Canopy Wing documents. In 1992, the Kohl administration hands them over to the US without causing a stir. Hall's cover is blown in 1988, and he is sentenced to 40 years in prison. Jeffrey Carney betrays the NSA as well. He doesn't do it for money, but for conscientious reasons. His punishment, 38 years in prison. He is released after almost 12 years. In 1983, Carney is a soldier in the Air Force stationed at the NSA field site in Marienfelde, Berlin. That is where he learned about operations which still disgust him today.
We didn't simply want to provoke the sleepy guys on the other side to see what they would do. We actually wanted to set off the alarm, literally the alarm. For those who don't know, that means we were planning to provoke the Russians into thinking it was the real thing. Think about what that means. An actual alert. 1983, the Cold War, Able Archer.
Carney provides only vague hints, no details. He might have to go back to prison if he were more specific. The command post exercise, Able Archer, is the highlight of the annual autumn maneuvers. Just like every year, NATO practices the defense of Western Europe against an attack. The deployment of troops for training purposes has been a routine exercise since the 1960s. But in 1983, Moscow has reason to follow the autumnal maneuvers with particular suspicion. This year, NATO relocates 40,000 troops in Europe, and 16,000 are flown in from the US in silent missions. In early November, the command post exercise, Able Archer, follows. Its scenario? NATO responds to poison gas attacks by its enemy with a nuclear strike. It also practices new procedures of nuclear release. There is evidence that Moscow misunderstood Able Archer as the initial phase of an imminent nuclear attack. An officer in the British military mission later reports that Soviet backfire atom bombers, seen here in original footage of their takeoff, had been stationed in East Germany during Able Archer. Was it just a routine stopover? Or were the bombers ready for a counterattack? Able Archer is going to plan. Then, a double agent sends reports about flash telegrams in Moscow saying NATO bases were on alert. The West recognizes the misunderstanding and reacts. The agent who warns NATO is Oleg Gordievsky, a colonel in the KGB and a mole for the British Secret Intelligence Service. He has been betraying secrets since 1974. The Able Archer crisis makes him famous.
There was great danger that bad decisions would be made. With intercontinental ballistic missiles, which take just 30 minutes to reach the other side, there's no time to think or to conduct an organized decision-making process.
Since the early 80s, the Kremlin's fear of a first strike by NATO has been growing. Yuri Andropov, the terminally ill General Secretary of the Communist Party, orders the secret services to look for evidence that the West is preparing a war. Moscow readies its nuclear arsenal, as classified US documents prove. The number of redacted passages suggests that Able Archer was not as harmless as Washington still makes it out to be.
Gordievsky was able to plausibly explain and convey the dilemma and the psychological state of those involved. That was his real achievement, describing what was going on in the apparatuses and in people's minds, making clear that the Soviet leaders were frightened and concerned and needed to be treated with consideration to prevent fatal decisions.
NATO takes Gordievsky's message seriously and abandons certain parts of Able Archer. In 1985, Gordievsky comes under suspicion. He flees Moscow by train and is smuggled into the West by the British Secret Service. Today, he is living near London.
Among the many defectors in the Cold War who went from the East to the West, Gordievsky was one of the few we can ascribe idealistic motives to. He really did want to keep the peace for both sides and avert a catastrophe.
Jeffrey Carney sees himself as a traitor for peace as well. He sees the NSA deliberately creating confusion within a nuclear power as reckless. When he comes under suspicion, he disappears and assumes a new identity with the help of the East German State Security Service. Living as Jens Carney in East Berlin, he is captured by US agents in 1991. To this day, he is convinced he has done the right thing.
Many people were not aware back then how close to the brink we were. Why should I regret something like this?
A journey back to the atomic age, to when the world stood at the brink of destruction. Nigel Dunkley is visiting the site of a former storage facility for nuclear warheads.
Fantastic. Amazing.
The crane runway to transfer the warheads is very well preserved. An air conditioning system provided a constant storage temperature. We are at the Special Weapons Site Linde-Stolzenhain, 1 hour south of Berlin. The site used to be a restricted area and was closely guarded. To military missions, it was unattainable. Stolzenhain provided space for 328 nuclear warheads in 2 identically structured bunkers. In the ground, there are mountings to anchor the nuclear weapons.
Jede Lagerhalle Each storage facility has 164 anchoring points. 4 points per warhead. So there were 41 warheads in one depot.
To be underground in a storage facility of Soviet nuclear warheads, over 300 of them, when you think of the combined destructive power of so many warheads, that is absolutely shocking. It is stunning. It's extraordinary.
Manfred Müller, the bunker guide, appears conspicuously well informed, and Dunkley wonders why.
And so I asked him, I said, Manfred, what were you? And he said, well, ich war Major. I was a major. And I said, well, that's interesting. Ich war auch Major. I was a major too. And then we both laughed, and we both realized that we must have been exact contemporaries, but exact opposites. So we were opposite each other. He was, for me, potentially a very dangerous person in those days. But here we were, laughing, talking, and the nice thing was being very friendly with each other.
Two former enemies who are now friends. I think that's fantastic. Thank you for the information.
Oh, you're welcome.
Unfortunately, their friendship only lasts for a short time. A few months later, Manfred Müller dies. Minsk, in Belarus. Fashionable clothes and international brands of car are everywhere to be seen. 40 years ago, when Vladimir Paskalev reported for duty in West Germany, it was very different. He is a driver for the Soviet military mission. Having been thrown into the hustle and bustle of a Western consumer society, he chauffeurs officers on their reconnaissance missions. He doesn't think of himself as a spy.
I wouldn't say we spied on one another. We observed one another, and we kept in touch with the high command of Soviet forces in Germany. Who could we observe anyway? We only monitored troop movements, as we had no access to restricted areas.
Aged 21, he arrives in Bunda, Westphalia, the site of the Soviet military mission, or Soxmis, in the British sector. His main task consists of reconnaissance missions. They have become routine in the conflict between two blocs that don't trust each other. Paskalev's superiors are officers in the Soviet military intelligence service. Their mission mirrors those of the British, the French, and the Americans in East Germany. Cold War routine. Today, Paskalev is heading to a meeting with a former comrade. Miodya, in the Belarus countryside, 3 hours from Minsk by car. Sergei Sidorenko is expecting Paskalev. The two have made contact via the internet, almost 40 years after their time in Germany. Sergei used to be a driver as well. He was with the mission in Frankfurt. Today he is in a wheelchair as he lost his leg after a stroke. A great misfortune that forced the long-distance truck driver into retirement. His photo album reminds him of a better time, when they were driving fast cars through Germany.
Did the police constantly chase you too?
Yes, British military police always followed us.
Just like Western missions did in East Germany, the Soviets operate within sight of counterintelligence. This is a surveillance video filmed in Frankfurt. A few years earlier, it could have been Sidorenko behind the wheel. US military police are waiting at the gate. All of a sudden, they take off at full speed. The car chase is on. The Soviet missions are suspected of conducting intelligence operations as well, such as using dead drops to pass on classified material. However, there is no proof of this. These car chases are familiar to Sidorenko, who finds them to be a nuisance. This photograph shows him in 1979 near Munich. Soon after, he will find himself with a gun to his head as German armed forces stop him. His officer had been trying to take pictures of an anti-aircraft system. For hours, he and his officer are trapped before the Americans rescue them from their predicament.
Of course, we were scared, especially when that officer from the German army was pointing his gun at me. I thought, that's it, I'm going to be shot. And my, up until that point, short life passed before my eyes.
Lawrence G. Kelly is exploring terrain near Neustrelitz. Former forester Erich Gebauer provides him with orientation. In 1984, on this country road, Kelly scored his biggest coup. It's the time of the so-called rearmament in West Germany. In response to the Soviet SS-20, NATO deploys Pershing II missiles. Their nuclear warheads threaten targets as far as Moscow. The nuclear confrontation in the middle of Europe intensifies. The Soviets respond to the Pershings. Night convoys in East Germany spell trouble. Kelly encounters one of those at the time.
I attempted to call out the VRNs, the license plate numbers, for the vehicles in the column, but there were none. The column was transporting cylindrical environmental canisters with very prominent longitudinal ribs, and those ribs were the primary signature feature for the scaleboard system.
The SS-12 scale board is a well-known missile model, but it has not been seen in East Germany before. The SS-12 has a range of 560 miles, enough to pose a nuclear threat to Pershing II sites in West Germany. Kelly is taking pictures of the ominous canisters from his tour's moving car. He expects the Soviets to force him off the road any second, yet they don't react. It is only later that it becomes clear how important his photographs were.
They were actually the first ground-level shots taken of this component of the weapon system at all, at least in the West.
The public does not see the ribbed canisters of the SS-12 scale board until they leave East Germany in 1987. 1 year earlier, US President Ronald Reagan and Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev had agreed to eliminate all intermediate-range ballistic missiles from Europe in the INF Treaty. Not only the SS-12, but also the Pershing II and SS-20 missiles were destroyed. Yet despite the policy of détente at the highest level, the spying war continues. Robert Hanssen ranks as one of the most serious traitors in the history of US intelligence services. It takes until 2001 for the FBI to expose and arrest him. Hanssen holds a key position in US counterintelligence, a dream position for a KGB mole.
Hansen ist also ein gläubiger Katholik.
Hansen is a devout Catholic. He attends church, has a family and several children, and is a devoted father. None of that fits the pattern. Traitors usually have broken biographies. Somebody who has divorced 3 times and is an alcoholic would be more typical.
Mere greed is what drives the supposedly upright citizen. He begins his lucrative double dealing in 1979. The investigative authorities estimate that over the years he has received $1.4 million in payment. As an intelligence professional, Hansen knows the pitfalls of the business and avoids them.
The Soviets didn't know who he was until he was arrested. He never met with anybody. He was extremely cautious and very clever. That's why it took so long to find him.
Hansen's arrest is a shock to US counterintelligence. He disclosed the position of secret bunkers for the government and information about operations against the KGB. His worst betrayal, however, was revealing CIA sources in the Soviet Union and thereby sending these informants to their doom.
Being this cold-blooded, without showing any external signs, and committing such a crime, make him the perfect criminal. He should have been sentenced to death, but narrowly avoided this fate by providing comprehensive testimony.
Hansen is sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Aldrich Ames is serving a life sentence as well. In exchange for several $1 million in blood money, he sends US agents in Moscow to their death, yet he shows no remorse.
As I get in my car, as I walk in my house, as I put on an expensive suit, do I have an awareness of blood guilt? No, I didn't.
He shows no sympathy for those he has betrayed, even as they are executed by the KGB. To Ames, death is an occupational hazard for top spies. One of those who was executed was Adolf Tolkachev, a radar specialist. He gives away information about the electronics of the latest Soviet missiles and jets. General Dmitry Polyakov is executed as well. He was a top informant for the CIA. Ames also exposes Oleg Gordievsky, who narrowly escapes the KGB.
Aldrich Ames has got blood on his hands, blood of those 10 about Soviet officials who died, executed by the KGB as a result of his betrayal.
Ames and Hansen, men without scruples. To them, it's all about money, not about status or matters of conscience. As East Germany celebrates the 40th anniversary of the Democratic Republic, its fall is imminent. Gorbachev presses East Berlin to implement reforms. He makes it clear to the SED that Moscow will no longer employ its troops against the groundswell of revolt in East Germany. The crucial question remains whether East German security forces would take up arms to save the Republic. Will the GDR's leadership risk open conflict with Moscow? West Germany's Federal Intelligence Service sends an all-clear signal to Bonn, drawing on sources in East Berlin that have not been revealed to this day.
It showed how dependent the GDR and its SED leadership was. They were not allowed to make such a decision themselves, but received orders from Moscow not to shoot. The very moment that order was issued and leadership followed it, it was basically all over.
Befolgt wurde von der SED-Führung, war die Sache im Grunde genommen gelaufen.
On November 9th, the wall comes down. The paralyzed regime watches on as their people's desire for freedom becomes overwhelming.
This is our time at last, the time for freedom.
Germany is on its way to reunification. The Cold War is ending. And the withdrawal of hundreds of thousands of soldiers starts, in the East as well as in the West. With the reunification of Germany in October of 1990, the era of the Allied military missions ends as well. Back in Belarus, in Sergei Sidorenko's garden, this countryside idyll does not seem quite right for him. During his time with the Soviet military mission in Germany, he was always on the road, as he was later as a long-distance truck driver. Today, he is in a wheelchair. He got to know Lawrence G. Kelly via the internet. They share memories of their service in the missions.
Я даже не ожидал, что такой человек.
I did not expect a high-ranking officer of the American military mission, such as Kelly, to establish contact with me, a soldier of the Soviet mission.
Бывшим солдатом советской миссии.
I am very happy to have found such a friend.
Такой друг.
Sergei Sidorenko is back on the road. His new wheelchair has restored some of his freedom. It was a Christmas present from veterans of the American and the British missions, organized by Lawrence G. Kelly. A gesture of solidarity between former members of the Reconnaissance Corps with a diplomatic passport. A gesture that goes beyond old enemy lines. Whether they were weapons scouts, spies, traitors by conviction or greed, they all acted as informers in the service of two superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union. Many risked their lives, and some even lost theirs. But most of them contributed to security during the Cold War, through reconnaissance, espionage, and even through betrayal. For nothing is more dangerous in the atomic age than to know nothing about your potential enemy.